All right, so we have our scene, we have one label and one button. And what we're going to do is connect these to code and then do some quick modifications to them. So I'm going to open up the assistant editor and I'm just going to hide the side panel. And to make sure that I have the right file selected, I could either go up here and change it from manual to automatic and go to my viewcontroller.swift, or alternatively, I could hold down Option and simply click the viewcontroller.swift to open it up in the assistant editor. Just for a little bit more screen real estate, I'm also going to close that panel. And I'm just going to twirl this down and twirl that down until I can see my different pieces of content. So I have my title and I have my button. Whenever we look at this viewcontroller.swift, and this is the default file built with every application, this is being run every time that our app starts. So whenever we encounter this screen, this is being run. What's basically happening right now is we have a simple line 9, import UI kit. UI kit is really the library that's running all of the interface and a bunch of other things. Then we have the class of view controller. So this is the class's name, and it is a subclass of something called UI view controller. UI view controller is a part of UI kit. Basically, it's loading a view controller that they're naming view controller. It's a little bit confusing, I know, but that's the name of it. This is just like whenever we declared variables before, just like whenever we did var, blah, blah, and it's of the type string, right? It's the same kind of structure here. So we have something called class view controller, and it's a UI view controller. That's the superclass. So this is tied to this right now. This view controller is tied to this view controller. So this code between these brackets, between this bracket here and this bracket here, is being run whenever we execute our view controller, whenever we open up our application. Now there comes with a little bit of stuff that's already sort of loaded in particular this function called viewDidLoad, and it's doing something called it's supering a command of viewDidLoad. Basically what that's doing is it's saying, hey, load the stuff, did it load? Okay, do these other things. And that function starts here and ends here. This is just in every single view controller file. We'll get more into the life cycle of a view controller and what this all means in future videos. But for now, you can think of it as, okay, this little chunk of code runs the first time. It's kind of like the setup code. And then the rest of this area is where I'll put the rest of my code. So what I'm going to do is grab my label, and I'm going to link my label just down below my override function, the viewDidLoad function. So that's going to be line 17. And there's a couple of different ways to link this. One of those ways is to hold down right-click and just drag over and then release, and it'll pull up this little window. I'm just going to click cancel for now. Another way is to select it over here in the hierarchy and just drag over, right-click, drag, and release. Alternatively, if I hold down Control, just regular click makes it a little bit easier to drag over. So I'm going to drag that over, release, and we get this little pop-up. And this little pop-up is the connection pop-up. And what's happening here is it's making a connection between this object in our scene and this piece of code. So it's saying, how do we want to connect it? Does it want to be an outlet or an outlet collection? We're just going to leave it as outlet. And what an outlet means is basically we can access this. What kind of object? What's the parent object? It's the view controller. What's the name? I'm going to call this my label. What's the type? Well, it's a UI label. And then the type of storage, and we'll just leave that as weak. And I'll hit connect. And what we get is basically, the simplest way to describe it is a variable. We get a variable called myLabel, and it's of the type UI label. So remember, we're thinking back to the last time we made variables. We had a string variable, and it was of the type string. In this case, we have a variable called myLabel, and it's of the type UI label. This part right here, this IB outlet, and the weak, we're not going to worry about the weak, but the IB outlet part means interface builder outlet. This is the interface builder on the left-hand side, and that's saying this is something from the interface builder, and it's connected, and it's being called myLabel. We see also that the line changed slightly. So line 18 now has this little circle on it, or depending on whatever line you selected to outlet your label to, it has this little circle, and whenever I put my mouse over it, it highlights in the user interface what that's connected to. So this line is connected to this piece of text. Okay, that's great. So an outlet can be accessed in a ton of different ways. Basically, with an outlet, we could change the content, we could change the actual text being displayed, we could change the color, the size, the shape, all kinds of things. And we can do that from the code. I'm going to click on the button now, and I want to connect the button to my code. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to right-click drag, or I can control-click drag and release it. I'm just going to release it underneath my outlet. And this time, I have a couple different options in the connection. I have outlet again, or I can pick action, and we're going to pick action. So before an outlet, whenever we picked that, that basically made a simple variable. Whenever I pick action, instead of making a variable, it's actually going to create a function or a method, so something to be executed. The object, we're just going to leave it as view controller. We're going to give it a name, so I'll call it button pressed. Now, it's very common, and it's kind of a style guide sort of standard to name actions as a past tense version of what happens to trigger that action. So what happens to trigger that action is the button is pressed, so I type in button pressed. The type is any, that's fine. And then we have the actual action itself, which is touch up inside. Touch up inside is basically, it's been tapped. There's a bunch of other actions in here like drag and things like that. I'm just going to leave touch up inside. And then do we want to keep track of the sender? And we'll just leave that as the default. So I'll hit connect. And what it did was it wrote a little function for me. So just like how I have that function up here, I now have a function down here. So IB action, IB outlet, interface builder action. It's a function. What's the function's name? Button pressed. And then these are what are called arguments. We'll get into this a little bit more later. And it's given me 2 curly braces. And between those curly braces, that's where I can put some code. All right, this is awesome. We've connected our label and we've connected our button to our code. Everything seems to be working great. I'm going to stop the video here. In the next video, I'm going to show you what happens whenever this breaks, and then we're going to write some code.